Alright, hey everybody. I'm not a EU4 content creator. I am just interested in a lot of the conversation around monopolies and mercantilism overall. I think they kind of get more of a bad rep than they really should. Um, Everything I'm going to be talking about in the coming minutes is going to be entirely for like single player. I am not a multiplayer person myself, so take that with a grain of salt. If you play multiplayer, this is not going to be for you. As well, this isn't really a tutorial or anything along those lines. This is probably going to be much more of a moderate to more experienced EU4 player discussion, rather than kind of explaining the basics of mercantilism and monopolies. But I'll throw in my opinion where I can, and I know there's a lot of different opinions and a lot of different play styles, and I'll try to address where mercantilism and monopolies might sit in relation to that. So I'm going to go right into um, just like a standard like Ottomans game, nothing too crazy, right? And of course, what I'm talking about is going to work across the board for every country, right? In terms of the base values for things. Um, so let's talk about mercantilism and what it does more broadly first, right? Because really, mercantilism is effectively the real value, in addition to potentially quicker money earlier in the game. That's kind of the main goal of monopolies, right? And if you don't know what monopolies are, it is these here monopolies on blank, right? This is monopoly on a specific trade good. You get a mercantilism for every time you renew it, which is every 10 years. In addition to 80% of the total revenue you would get over that 10 years, um, is given to you all in one lump sum as soon as you use this privilege, right? So before I get into the privileges, I'm just giving kind of a context of why we're going to be talking about mercantilism, right? So mercantilism, for every point of mercantilism, and a point in this case is 1 percentage point, right? Because you can see it's identified as 10%. For each point in mercantilism, or which is exactly what this +1 mercantilism, the gain 1 mercantilism is, right? You get 2% additional provincial trade power, which I'll talk about here in a minute. Embargo efficiency, which, that might be more pertinent for multiplayer rather than for single player. Because, embargoes, you're going to embargo some opposing rivals, but really, unless they're your rival, you generally don't want to mess with embargoing other countries. The the other final benefit is that there is an additional buff to your equilibrium, your loyalty equilibrium with whatever group is kind of your merchant class, right? I forgot there's in India there's a separate group that's not called the Merchants Guild. I forgot how to pronounce their name, but that's the baseline of what mercantilism does, right? So let's go through these in order, right? Provincial trade power. So go to open up the trade screen. If you don't know much about trade, I'm not going to go over a bunch in this video. This is just specifically looking at mercantilism and such. So in each province, right, so Selanik, we have a coastal center of trade. You can see here we have, due to the center of trade, the local trade power has a +10, right? You can see right underneath my mouse. And so if we look down here in the bottom left-hand corner of the province window, we can see trade power. You can see it based on its development, the fact that it has that port, right, the entrepot, gives +10. And then in order to get to your total sum of trade power for that province, you multiply it by a modifier, which in this case is 145%, right? So we have 12 times 1.45, and that's going to be our total trade power for the province, right? And then your local autonomy modifies it negatively, right? So if you're at 100% autonomy, which realistically you're almost never going to be, that's going to give you 50% reduction in your trade power to this province. Relatively straightforward. So, to give a quick breakdown or comparison, I guess, for what mercantilism can do. Right, I'm just gonna give myself a butt ton of points. So we have currently in the Ragusan trade node, right? Our provinces that are actually going to be a part of the Ragusan trade node are right here. These 8 provinces here. So if I click on the Ragusan trade node, I can come down here in the bottom again and see we have 0 trade power from light ships, and we have 28.3 trade power from our provinces. Almost all of it is coming from Selenik, right, because of this entrepot, right? And then further, it's modified by our global trade power, right? Like the modifier, global trade power. That can be seen, an example in case you're like, global trade power, what's that? Should be kicking around here, right there, right? So global trade power stacks, in effect, multiplicatively with provincial trade power, because you're multiplying by provincial trade power here, right? And then you're further multiplying the outcome of the provincial trade power multiplier, again, to get your total trade power, not only in one trade node, but in all trade nodes. So, let's focus back in on the provincial trade power. So 28.3, that is how much trade power we have in this trade node right now, right? And that is with 10 mercantilism. So let's do a quick calculation, right? The Ottomans have potential for 5 monopolies. Monopoly on wool, 1, right? Monopoly on paper, 2, 3, right? And you have 4, 5, right, for livestock and mining. So that's 5. So that means every 10 years you can get 5 mercantilism. So if we're going to be playing, if you're going to have these monopolies for 100 years, right, that means we're going to have 50 mercantilism coming out of that. Now, whenever I have monopolies, I often continue to have them for longer than 100 years. But let's just roll with it for now. And that would put us at 1544, right? And then realistically, I get rid of my monopolies within the next, we'll say 30 to 40 years, because I try and get rid of them around 1580, 1570, if I do have any. I try to get rid of all of them, right? So realistically, let's say we're going to have 70, 75 mercantilism, which means we're going to have 65 total mercantilism gained from our monopolies. Does that make sense? We started with 10 mercantilism, most countries do, and then we're going to get 65 mercantilism solely through monopolies being reset. And if we have 5 trade goods that we're using for monopolies, right, that means we effectively need 120 years to pass, or to get to 1560 AD, right, and then start decreasing it to prepare for the age of absolutism. So that means I'm going to get my mercantilism here up to 75, and this is obviously, a lot of numbers are going to change through the game. This is just an example of the calculations and how 120 years of monopolies can impact your trade power and more broadly, right? And that's not only for your core provinces, this also will affect your trade companies, which is one of the biggest benefits, in my view, of high mercantilism, is you need less provinces, less buildings and upgrades to your trade company to get them to a very high level of trade, right? So remember, this was, 28.3, right? 28.3 before we increase our mercantilism, so I'm going to spam out some mercantilism here to get up to 75%, right? Again, this is Just an example of 120 years into the game, maintaining 5 monopolies, right? So now we're at 75 mercantilism, right? Now, we can see, if we let a month tick by, this 28.3 is going to go to 54.9. So 28.3 to effectively 55. 28 to 55. That is, in effect, double the trade power that you have in this node, right? We were at 6% in the Ragusa trade node. We're now at 12%. Does that make sense? And again, the only thing that really matters in this case is our total trade power. But again, because we are multiplying all of these values, right, by now 150%, right, 1.5 times the value, we now have effectively doubled our trade power in this trade node. And this would scale substantially harder as well if you for some reason had additional global trade power modifiers, right, such as from prestige or power projection, or just from ideas, right? So that's a quick provincial trade power, right? That is kind of the benefit, is you can have a huge buff to trade companies and your trade alone long term. I am not someone that's ever going to advocate for keeping monopolies through to like 1700, right? The farthest I would really keep monopoly around would probably be like the mid 1500s. And that's just because that's when, for my conquests anyways, that's when I'm going to start tinkering or getting into trade companies. And I think mercantilism with trade companies, you get extreme trade power extremely quickly, and it's quite entertaining. As well, let me see if I can actually pull it open here. I don't think I can because I don't have a trade company. So let me see, let me do a integrate the Mamluks. So I'm going to integrate the Mamluks, right? And I'm going to throw a bunch of cash on here, just to give an example, right? So what is very interesting as well, do you see these, the company depot? This is arguably the best building for trade companies as well. If anyone is, unsure, oh, what building should I go for first? Realistically, to me, the company depot is the best. In addition to the same goods, total goods produced, right? The brokers exchange, those are two extremely potent buildings. And then if you want to further that, you can go for the Ottoman township, right? That way you have all these modifiers stacking on top of each other consistently. So, also, get rid of you for now. So in this case, right, we can see we have 10.1 trade power, and trade companies alone double the trade power in a region, which is giving, you can see why it says a plus 100% because it belongs to a trade company, right? And then we also are getting 150% from mercantilism. So that is huge on its own face. Now, let me have a full month tick by so things can kind of reset and realize what's going on before I tinker with this any further. Okay. So, now let's look at specifically Dumyat for now. You can see we have 26 trade power in this province that has a estuary, and that's it. It has a single estuary running through it. Let me see if there's one that has even less, right? So the Gaza Strip here, right? We have 1.6 from development, and we're multiplying that by almost 4 times, which is huge. So now, right, we have a base of 1.6. If we come up here, take Company Depot and throw that down, give it a month tick, or well, I guess a day tick actually does it for this. You can see that we went from about 6, right, to 21 from a single upgrade, from a single company depot, right? The reason that I bring this up is because obviously you're going to have the trade company modifier, the coastal modifier isn't going to be too surprising. But when you build the company depot, right, the trade company depot, that gives a base value of 4. Now, with our current mercantilism, not only is that giving 4, due to mercantilism alone, we're getting an extra 6 trade power in this one province because of our mercantilism alone. So this gives an example of how potent mercantilism can affect provinces, especially if the base value of trade power in that province increases. I hope that makes relative sense and why I explain that, right? So, let's say, if we had maybe 30% control, right, in Aleppo. If we had 30% control in Aleppo with 10% mercantilism, right? If we had, 10% mercantilism. If we had 75% mercantilism, that would mean that 30% is, or well, the total trade power of 30% is going to be multiplied effectively by 140% more, or 130% more, which is likely going to get you up above that 50%. So the reason I bring this up is because that's when you get a free merchant when you have trade companies. Obviously, merchants are crazy good. You have 10 or 12 merchants by 1600 due to expansion, right? That is going to be a huge benefit for you to push trade to your primary home trade node or collect in isolated trade nodes. There's going to be a lot of potential benefits. For me, one of my favorite things to do with an Islamic nation is propagate religion if I can. Especially if I don't need necessarily more trade power, if I already have a substantial majority of trade power. But of course, you can set any of these policies. Siege ability and artillery bonus versus a fort, that's crazy, right? That's a huge benefit, and that's the benefit of having additional trade companies in the area, because you will get more merchants. So you can get 10% siege ability and another +1 when you're going against forts. Crazy, right? Spy network construction's okay. Improve relations okay. Propagate religion's pretty good. Does that make sense? Obviously, this is more than just trade companies, the Rant, right? So that's going to be one quick example of provincial trade power and the potential things that provincial trade power can impact, right? I highlighted trade companies primarily because that's what's going to impact the most on. Of course, you're still going to have all of your core provinces as well are still going to get literally 1.5 times doubled, right? You're going to be multiplying by 250% or 2.5 times the trade power in every single one of your provinces, trade companies or cores, which is going to be substantial, especially if you have trade efficiency modifiers, because everyone knows that late game trade is going to be the largest economic kind of boom. That's going to be where all of your income comes from. Maybe not all, a large portion of your income is going to come from trade, in addition to production, and then late game tax falls off pretty hard, generally speaking, unless you have specific modifiers for it. So that's mercantilism, right? Embargoing, effectively it just means you're going to stop them from being able to impact trade to the same degree. If you embargo someone, your propagation of your trade power is going to be more efficient against your enemies. And then the Merchants Guild loyalty equilibrium, it's something that it exists. I wish that they doubled it. I wish that instead of it being, um, a very small portion, let me get the exact number here. Instead of it being 0.05%, loyalty equilibrium per mercantilism, I wish that they had doubled that to 0.1. That way, it would actually have a more pertinent buff. That would mean in this case we're getting a 7.4 equilibrium, but that's its own balancing issue, I suppose. But that's a change I wish Paradox would do in regards to the loyalty equilibrium change. But nonetheless, 3.7% loyalty equilibrium is nice. Is it going to really impact anything long term? It's not going to be a game changer. It's just a nice little change. Really, the primary player for mercantilism is the 150% provincial trade power modifier, right? So that's mercantilism, and a quick breakdown of the benefits of that. So moving forward, right, going to be looking at the estates now. Let me do a quick reset. I'm going to reopen EU4. So now I'm going to look at the potential setups that people have for estates at the beginning of the game. Right, there are some people that don't really care about influence for their estates. I myself, I prefer low to medium influence estates. I don't like them having above 50 influence, generally speaking. In some cases, I will make an exception, but generally speaking, right? Let's do a quick example. What's a small country that starts pretty early on can go into a war? All right, let's start with a Irish nation. Right, we're gonna start with Desmond. So, I'm gonna fabricate some claims and stuff, but also explain a few different ways people set up their estates. It really depends on the person. I obviously have my preferred method. So my current goal, right, or my current setup that I go with is obviously the monthly military power, monthly admin power, monthly diplo power. If you don't know what this is, you literally can get effectively gold for free and 1 monthly power of each prospective monarch point. Effectively for free. It's going to be a bit of a pain, but more or less for free. So what I do in almost any nation, including the Ottomans, because they're going to expand early, is I go primacy of the nobility, right? I go religious state, and then I need to dev up once, right? So just for the sake of it, you always want to make sure you hit local dev cost. You want to dev up once, right? Then you want to grab that, and you can still see we're now at 0, except we're at 0.196. That means we can still sell our titles. 53 gold is quite a bit for this little country of Desmond. And then you're always going to want to seize land and then dev up one more time. The reason that you want to dev up one more time as well, let me do a quick reduction in the audio. There you go. The reason you want to dev up as well is because if you have below 5% crownlands, these negative modifiers are slightly higher, right? You can see 0.3 autonomy change in all your provinces, like it's a global modifier. That's very bad. And then national tax modifier of minus 20%. That sucks. It could be worse though. And if you have subjects, you do not want to be in this realm. So you want to dev up one more time. So look here, right? Plus 0.3 and minus 20%, right? You dev up one more time, plus 0.2 and only minus 15. That's still a lot. but that's a substantial benefit, and you're also going to get +1 power for a majority of the game. I actually keep these three. I should keep these three privileges up into, you know, early 1600. The only time I remove them is when I need that extra little bit of absolutism to really expand hard. So this is my personal start, right? And then what you can do is, often, anyways, I've seen a lot of people take the military advisor cost, this in exchange for the stability cost. That's completely fine as well. Um, the increased levies, right? That's also decent. However, I don't like the influence. Now, the reason I don't like the influence, for those of you who don't know, you get Crownland back during your conquest based on an equilibrium that's calculated from your estate's influence. So the way it is right now, the total that this would give would be roughly, I believe, 60 or 65%. Crownlands would be the equilibrium point for the given influence in all of these nations, or in all of these estates, right? So if I was to conquest all of, Great Britain without, doing claim estate land or seize land, I would eventually get to 60% crownlands, given that I don't increase these influence values. So, I oftentimes like to try and mitigate my influence as much as I can, especially during the beginning of the game. I say especially during the beginning of the game because currently I'm at 5% crownlands, and I want to push toward that higher equilibrium as much as possible. Because the quicker you can get to 30% crownlands as a country, the substantially better off you will be. So in this case, right, some people might take church sanctuaries or oversight by the clergy, things of that nature. By the way, take church sanctuaries over oversight of the clergy. Never take this if you instead have this option, right? So I'm going to, just to try and make sure this equilibrium gets up to at least 45, ideally 50, or actually ideally close to 60, right? Because 60 is when you start getting additional, positive benefits, right? The secondary benefit for each estate. So I'm going to get up to 46 for this, and I'm content with that. However, that's going to make their influence go up to 34, which is okay. It's not bad. For the nobility, right, they're already at 40%, right? And I can give them Monopoly, and that'll throw them up to 50%. Now, why would I give them Monopoly instead of giving them right of council or doing supremacy over the crown? Supremacy over the crown, first of all, is a really great privilege, right? I'm not trashing on supremacy over the crown. It's a good one because you can complete a diet agenda, right? Or a diet, I don't know how you say it. And then they can immediately give you another agenda before you summon the diet again, right? They can effectively just instant pop it again, so you can get 2 potential missions before you get the summon the diet again. Very good privilege. But in this case, I'm not going to give out private trade fleets. Of course, control over monetary policy is hot garbage, and dead to the burgers is decent. But realistically, I'm going to try and keep these values as low as possible for their influence. That way, when I expand, it will actually get higher crownlands than if I had more influence, right? So let's do a quick comparison point here, right? I'm going to arbitrarily increase my influence here, right? So let's do, we'll grab a bunch of high influence stuff. Okay. So realistically, this is probably 10-ish more influence in each of these estates, maybe even 15, than a lot of players would realistically use, even the ones that like higher influence estates. But let me do a quick claim. Actually, I want debug mode. Hold on, I need to check the exact console command. And so also the reason that I'm showing you this all like live is because I want you to know that I'm not doing anything weird with the game, right? This is all above board. So do that, and then also do add underscore claim to 47 and add underscore claim to 62. All right. So given the circumstances, right, I'm just going to hire a company, and I'm going to give you a quick example of how your crownlands are going to change with a high influence, right? And I'm going to back out and instead go through the same process with a low influence and take the same 3 provinces, right? And we'll see the potential difference early on in the game. I thought I was supposed to have a claim on those. Province. Oh, oops. I'm such an idiot. I was doing totally 4377. There we go. And then we also want 375. And I also want. Yep. I also want 4378. Okay. Now let me unpause, and that should tick off next month. Right. Okay. Subject. Actually, so let me actually check something else here. So if I go integrate MCM, right, we're currently at 5.183. Does that change? Okay, yes, it does change it. Okay, so I'm assuming that's just like if we just took the province in a war. So we gained 5 total percent for taking that province, right? Let me also summon the diet here. So we got 5% for taking that province. Now, let's also take these provinces, right? And now, because we're going to be getting closer to the equilibrium, right? Because it's just like with the estates here. See, right? It has a high equilibrium, so the equilibrium change per month is going to be high. If our equilibrium was at 50, the change would instead be like 0.14% per month instead of 0.26. So with a so in theory, this should change less than 5% if I'm going to take Ormond, right? So let me see here, integrate ORD, unpause. So you see now, well actually let me check the development. Okay, Ormond actually has higher development, so in theory, that should actually change even more. Change our crownland control even more. But you see now we're at 13.883, which means we just gained 3.7-ish percent. And that's it, right? Let me also take Thomond, right? And now we got 0.1% for Thomond. okay, which is 8 development. So we're getting closer and closer to the equilibrium here at about 14%. That's not good, right? Because remember, we want to get to at least 30%. We want to get to 30% as quickly as possible as a country, right? So now let's run through this exact same scenario, except with a couple monopolies to keep equilibrium high, and then as low of influence as possible, at least at the beginning of the game. I'm not saying keep low influence all the way through the whole game. I'm saying, especially with the opener of the monthly powers, right? That is huge. It's very important to have low influence early game when you have extremely low crownlands. So let's do a quick reset, and we'll get back to that again. And sorry, I'm messing up some of the commands here and there. I generally just play Iron Man, and I'm kind of a novice in terms of actually doing things and setting stuff up in the console. So so that what I'm effectively trying to show is the fact that the monopolies give plus 10 loyalty without influence can be very beneficial. This is a long form way of explaining that, or indicating it, showing you the differences, right? So the equilibrium point was about 14%, right? That's what we just saw over here. I'm going to summon the diet anyways, right? Even though it increases influence by 5, I'm still going to. So you can see the things I'm taking. This does not affect nobility influence, right? This does not affect clergy influence, right? And then let me do, again, the quick dev, right? Everyone and their cousin knows this strategy. Okay. So, we have these 3. Those are locked in. Those are going to be there every time for my play. How I play the game, they're going to be there every time. Now, the goal is to get all of these guys up to 45% equilibrium at a minimum. Right? As such, again, church sanctuaries, not only is it less maximum absolutism, but it also comes with additional benefits when you construct buildings, right? So that is going to be a take that will get me up to 45, about 46% equilibrium. Burgers, I'm going to take something with a good ratio. What is their current equilibrium? All right, so I personally like to, if I have a really crappy air, I like to get rid of the air first. You can see this says gain 15 prestige, but if I close this and go back in, because I'm now in negative prestige, right? Let the day pass, and you can see now it's 25 prestige because I'm in negative prestige. So if you're going to disinherit before you take the patronage of the arts. So I would take patronage of the arts, which gets me to 33.7%, which realistically it's going to be pretty darn close, or close enough, if I take free enterprise, right? So that makes burgers at a loyalty equilibrium that I personally view as good enough, right? Especially because you're going to be getting up to 45 once you have positive prestige through some conquests. So, clergy is at a decent point. Again, the prestige is the major player. Nobility needs to have another plus 10. Instead of going with supremacy over the crown or anything like this early, instead I would go monopoly. So if I could, I would save an extra 20 influence from the given situation by not having church sanctuaries, instead switching that out for a monopoly, right? And get rid of free enterprise and instead exchange that out for a single monopoly as well. Effectively saving 20 total influence. and increasing our crownland's stability point. So remember, with the high influence values, we doesn't matter. With the high influence values, our equilibrium was at 14, and we literally took all three of these to get up to 13.83 or something like that, right? So, in the same exact order as well, I'm doing this. This one integrated monster. Let me see. So I want MCM. That's what it is. Okay. Right? So our equilibrium at high influence was 14, and that was very slow to push us out of our below 30% slump, right? So let me get Ormond in here, and then also integrate M&S. Okay. Also get Thomond in here. So now our previous equilibrium is 14. This is pushing us towards 17, right? So let's also say, right, so effectively it's a 3-ish% difference. If I got rid of, let's see, if I got rid of these two, right, effectively saying, if I had less influence by 20, right, we would get even higher. The, close to equilibrium point would probably be pushing more toward 20%. But the key factor here is that there is a substantial difference between 13 or 14% and above 15%, right? This is almost 17%. And that is 15% is another level of the Crownland negative modifiers. Instead of having the negative, the monthly autonomy change of 0.2, right? We have then just dropped back down to 0.1, which is going to be substantially beneficial because then your autonomy is not going to change during peacetime, right? Or you're going to have to keep a state or a state modifier, the local autonomy change modifier. You're going to have to keep that reduced. Those are kind of potential benefits in that regard. So now let's keep this exact same thing in mind and then do the exact same conquest, imagining that the plus 10% equilibrium points are instead monopolies instead of the plus 10 equilibrium of loyalty and plus 10 influence, right? Let's imagine we reduce that by another 20%, right? Our Crownland equilibrium, actually, I can do this real quick. I would also recommend giving it a quick look through on the Paradox Wiki, but you can see here, Crownland equilibrium is 20%, or at 20% for each estate, is about 50%. Crownland equilibrium at 60% influence isn't even 30%, which means you're still going to have at least some of those negative modifiers for less than 30% Crownland. Now, of course, once you get above, 25, hold on, let me see what, okay, sorry, I was incorrect. Once you get above 10, so the minimum values per level here, you have 1 to 4% Crownlands is huge negatives, right? This is why we dev up one more time to get to 5% Crownlands. That gets us to 0.2 per month. And then once we complete our first couple conquests, that's going to get us to 10% Crownlands very quickly, right? But the sooner we can get to 30% Crownlands, generally the better. 10% tax modifier isn't, you know, very drastic. To me, the local autonomy or global autonomy change is going to matter more than 10% tax, right? So 20 crownlands is absolutely a goal that I try and aim for as soon as possible. So let me go up to Desmond. Right, we're going to do the same exact thing, except in this case, I'm going to not take anything with extra influence. Right? As in, absolutely no diet, none of the plus 10 loyalty and influence, right? So here, right, we're going to do the exact same strat. Do a quick dev. Take that. Sell titles, dev again, and this. Okay. So, we're back to the exact same setup. Now, obviously, I don't have enough monopolies. This would only apply if you had a larger country rather than a single province, right? So, again, 5.18. Let me integrate some of these guys. So integrate Ormond and then Thomond. Integrate Thomond. Right? So now, let a day pass here. Oops. You see, we are almost at 20%, which means that would get us to not even having this autonomy change very quickly. We would need to dev this 4 times, because each time you dev a province, Crownland goes up by 0.2%, right? So a quick example of that as well. Okay, so, right, we can see 19.38, this should be 19.58, right? So if I dev up just a few more times, you can see we're very close, right? And then one more, we get to the 20%. So instead of doing this as well, right, instead of deving up 4 times, because you're going to be so close to equilibrium, you instead, or not equilibrium, to 20%, you instead could also, right, integrate CNN, right? This should put us even higher if I was to unpause here, right? That just gave us 2.8 something percent just from claiming Connaught, right? So instead of deving up 4 times, I instead could have just eaten 1 more province, and then I am rapidly out of the autonomy change per month, right? I have effectively recovered from this early game strat of giving the primacy of nobility, religious state, effectively getting these free monthly these free points, more or less, right? I have gotten rid of the downside of getting these points within 4 wars, right? As opposed to working much harder and probably having to take much of Ireland at the high influence, right? In fact, we can check that. So in theory, we need to have conquered 4 provinces with this low influence. And this isn't even super low influence here, right? This is with monarchy and reform nobility, right? Or yeah, sorry, feudal nobility, not reform nobility, right? So in some cases, you'll have even less influence and recover even harder. If people are still watching this as well, bless your heart. I'm just giving a quick explanation about Crownland and how early game influence, especially with those with the strat of low Crownlands, it's just very important to have low influence, in my opinion. I never have high influence in my games. It just allows a total world of difference. Let's see. So I will do the same thing that I did before, and I'm not going to give out ridiculous privileges that just suck, or I'm not going to take loans out for no reason. I'm just going to have high influence early on here, right? Desmond, same thing. Load, 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 load. Load, 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 load. Okay. So, I'm going to go back into debug mode. And then let me get all of those amazing privileges given out. So, again, I'm primarily basing a lot of my opinion here on the fact that a lot of people do this strategy. If you don't do this strategy, then realistically this probably isn't going to apply to you so much, and I'm sorry that I can't be entertaining enough for you in this video because it doesn't apply to you. So, supremacy over the crown, again, great one. If you want additional loyalty, right, you'd go right of council, and then people love aristocratic counselors, right? So, let's give all of the councils out. Let's go church sanctuaries. Realistically, I don't think people would take oversight by the clergy as well, but just for the sake of, you know, example, right? Private trade fleets, people take that every now and then. Free enterprise, again, decent. And then commercial advisory board, okay? And then, of course, we're going to call a diet and call it good. So, let's see how much we have to conquer in order to get to 20% as a baseline, right? So, let's see. Right now, from those provinces again, we are at 12%, right? This was like 19.3% for these provinces when we had our low value, right? So now, let's keep going. Right, and this would have gotten us to around 21% if we had taken Connacht before. This gets us to 13.68%, right? We are already at a 7%, if not 8% gap between minimizing influence early in comparison to allowing influence to just go, right? So let's see how much we have to conquer until we get to a value of 20%. Right, so we just conquered another 3 provinces. That got us to almost 16%. Right? In fact, I would not be surprised here. I'm going to take all of Scotland. Right? All of Scotland. That got us to 18.28%. Right? Do people understand kind of my point here? Right? Let's take all of England. Every single bit of England. That gets us to 19.78%. Now, I can tell you that at low influence, we would probably be at 35, 40, if not higher, percent crownlands. We'd be well above 30% crownlands if we took all of Scotland, England, and these provinces, right? But as it is right now, we are still sitting in the monthly autonomy change of plus 0.1 with a negative 15% national tax modifier, even though we just got all of this land. Don't see a problem with that. I personally do. Now, I get that, you know, people love to spam the seize land button, right? If you can, at the very beginning of the game, take land without needing to click the seize land button, that also means you don't need the extra, you know, 20% loyalty equilibrium, right? Your equilibrium only needs to be at 35, 40%, right? At most, because if you don't have to click this button one extra time, that means you might be able to skip one step early on if you're going to be expanding quite hard, right? So that's going to be my quick rant on, I would say quick, very long and annoying rant about influence, right, in estates, and how that negatively impacts the monthly power pluses for each of these, right? And then, of course, this is kind of going overboard because this has, well, actually, 60 nobility loyalty makes... okay, never mind. I thought this was going to be like 80 loyalty in each of these. This doesn't even have that high of loyalty, except clergy. Clergy's pretty high. So in this case, right, I might have 20% maybe extra influence in total, potentially 30 on the higher end. But you can see just how much it impacts your recovery from early game taking these monthly power ticks. So that's going to be my quick general explanation. If you have any questions, feel free to throw a comment either in the video or on Reddit. I think I'm going to throw this on the EU4 subreddit for any blessed people that might actually watch it. So, yeah, absolutely. So, Monopolies, huge benefit to increase loyalty while also not increasing influence. They also have a huge benefit for provincial trade power. Embargoing doesn't matter too much. The loyalty equilibrium is very minor at best, but it's there. But to me, the loyalty equilibrium for having a monopoly is very important. The provincial trade power is very strong, especially if you're building to scale into mid-game rather than trying to push early. But you can also get quite a bit of early money, build very high quality temples, right? If you're the Ottomans and you just took Byzantium, right, and you don't have quite enough money to build a temple, and you can drop 2 monopolies or have gold before from monopolies, right, to get you up to that temple, which gives plus 0.2 or plus 0.26 or plus 0.3 per month. And then of course it's your capital, and anytime you're going to concentrate dev, that's going to scale even more, right? So having a early game temple or workshop, right? Early game workshops, if you have high production land, is also going to be very good. And if you can, get that accruing, plus 0.2, plus 0.18 or higher, right, per month, that's going to scale so well through the game. And in terms of taking monopolies, right, you do not want to take monopolies that are going to be extremely high value trade goods, right? Monopolies you want to take are going to be, the mining and smelting or smithing, livestock, right? Wheat, not actually, I don't think you can do wheat, actually. Livestock you can, right? Things that you don't have a lot of, because the goal is going to be getting mercantilism as cheaply as possible. So if you are the Ottomans and you have livestock, right, you can get the livestock monopoly. That's going to give you 25 gold, right, which is that livestock monopolies, or that's all of your livestock production. For 10 years times 0.8. So it's 8 out of 10 years production value for that trade good. So in effect, you're losing 20% of the total. So what is 25 divided by 0.8? You're going to be upwards of 35, at most 30. I don't want to do the math off the top of my head. So you're missing out on maybe 8 gold, 5 gold, 6 gold. for 1 mercantilism and 10 loyalty equilibrium for whichever estate that you're giving that to. And that 10 equilibrium can instead be replacing 10 equilibrium and 10 influence, right? That could be replacing oversight by the clergy, right? And all that's going to do is literally cost you maybe into the double-digit gold if you're using like a high-value trade good. If you're the Ottomans and you're using silk or something like that, right? You might be losing 40 or 50 gold long-term, but you're gaining the rest of the gold up front, which you can build buildings with. You can recruit armies, you can increase expansion. You're also increasing your loyalty while also, in theory, or comparatively, decreasing your influence in the same estate. To me, those are all very valuable, important aspects of monopolies. So don't trust people that say monopolies are hot garbage, never use them, right? If you're going to use monopolies, use them early game, use them on cheap trade goods that you're not going to be like deving up, right? Don't dev up after you do this, right? If you're going to use a monopoly and also dev up a province, dev up before you do that, because then you'll get additional gold early on. Because the monopoly isn't based on potential deving, it's based on what it is currently. So that is my rant. Bless everyone who's gotten to this point. If you've gotten to this point, feel free to leave comments, discuss below, whatever. Additionally, something that you do need to keep in mind that's a positive is you'll be getting additional buffs due to higher influence, but it also comes with the caveat of before the age of absolutism, it's going to be a pain in the ass to remove these. So, all right, that's it. Thanks, guys.